So I'll start by just putting a few topics on the table, and you'll pick up a common thread with good business. We start with Data Vault. Dan has said that Data Vault is and has always been about the business. But then I'll throw a few others on the table. Data Mesh, which focuses on a small but cohesive part of the total business, or Data Fabric, the entire business, or data interoperability, which may involve multiple businesses. Um, and then, of course, you've got business intelligence. So there's a common theme there of business. And just to make Neil happy, there's also business thinking. I'll leave that one to Neil. There's a problem, though. Historically, my observation has been that you've got people in IT who may feel uncomfortable interacting with the business. And then on the other side, you've got business people, and I've met some who are technically excellent, but many of them feel a bit uncomfortable interacting with IT. We need to build a bridge, and that's where I'm going to set context for today. Start with Source System Data Vault. You've probably heard of it. What is Source System Data Vault? It's an approach to Data Vault that focuses on systems, on technology instead of the business. But we want better Data Vault. So a number of years ago, I wrote a book, The Elephant in the Fridge, that looks at how you can engage with the business to do Data Vault. One little problem though, I've heard people say, well, Dan uses the phrase enterprise ontology, and some people say to get that enterprise ontology, that view, takes too long, costs too much, may actually be virtually impossible. And I'm suggesting that we can perhaps have a look at a metaphor of town planning to see if we can do easier data vault. And then more recently, another book, another elephant book, The Data Elephant in the Boardroom, and two differences from the earlier book. One is this is part of the bridge building, trying to engage more with people who are from the business or from IT, but who are less comfortable in doing data modeling. And importantly, it looks at applying the enterprise-wide data perspective to a lot more than just Data Vault. When I say just Data Vault, please, I'm an enthusiast, so don't misread that. And finally, if we can help you deliver more value to the business might value you more, which might be helpful at salary review time. The agenda for today. So we want to have a look. Look, there are heaps of gotchas, things that can trip you up when you're doing a data project. I want to look at um, some that I've seen in practice that can really be problematic. Then we want to have a look at town planning, this metaphor. What is town planning? How does it work? How can we apply it to data so that we do better and easier data vault? The third one is looking at data town plans and applying them far more widely. If you've got these skills to do better and easier data vault, why not leverage them to get a lot more benefit for you and the business? And then we'll just pull together some closing comments. So let's start with some stumbling blocks. The first one, a true but light-hearted story from Australia. Um, there was a gentleman who had a block of land and he bought a house that was going to be demolished. He had it trucked to his town, and he had good people, good tradespeople with good tools. They made one fundamental mistake. They delivered it to the neighbour's vacant block. Um, Now, that could have ended up a whole heap of legal fights. The two neighbours took I'll say, a mature approach. They just swapped titles, so problem solved. But what on earth has this story of delivering a house to the wrong address got to do with data? So, if you deliver data against the wrong concept, um, then, for example, if you have in a data vault hub, you have entries in there that represent things that aren't customers but should be, and conversely, you have customers that should be against the hub that aren't. How can you do something as simple as counting the number of active customers? So two stories, because can this really happen? So I did work for a health insurance organization, and just in chatting to the people, one of the questions was if you have a grandparent who pays the health insurance bill and one of his children has a child who so the his child makes an appointment for his grandchild. Um, who's the customer? And the answer from some of the people in this company was that poor little kid sitting with his mouth wide open in the chair, frightened as he's actually the customer. Other people from the same organization said, no, 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 the customer is the person who pays the premium. So you have to engage with the business to clarify what a customer is before you can do your data engineering work and load customer data to the customer hub. It's pretty fundamental. Another story though, I did some work for a cemetery. And again, just interacting with the business and saying, okay, you want to keep track of customers, and they presented a scenario where somebody has purchased a prepaid funeral plan. Um, Later on, unfortunately, they have Alzheimer's, dementia, and they have somebody acting as a power of attorney to represent them. Is the power of attorney now the customer, or is it the original person? The original person dies, and now you've got an executor. So again, questions, you might be surprised, but pinning down something as simple as what is a customer can actually be fraught with danger. And my message is simple. Just like you can deliver a house to the wrong address, you can deliver data against the wrong business concept unless you engage with the business and find out what they want in your data vault. So that's the uh, the first. The second issue, and this might, I guess, trigger some responses from some of the participants today. So I worked with a gentleman, this was in the 1970s. Terry was one of our best developers. The boss got promoted, went into state, and Terry, best developer, became the new manager. And he said, I hate it. I love coding. Now I'm doing paper shuffling while others who work for me are doing the fun stuff. He demanded a demotion. He wanted a salary reduction. He wanted to go back to coding. He didn't want to interact with the business. He wanted to stay technical. One of our colleagues, Peter, flipped it the other way round. He was a great developer, but he wanted to get out and get into the business. So where does that leave you? Um, a few possibilities. Maybe you love technology and you don't want to interact with senior business people. Maybe you do, but if you don't, maybe today you can find out how you can engage somebody else to act on your behalf, or you can have the fun and do it yourself. Issue three. This is a fun one. Um, you can probably gather I've been around for a year or two. So quickly, I'll talk about the think big, think small flip-flop, where we have problems if we try to get the big picture. We have troubles if we focus on something that is too small. So 1970s, siloed applications. 1980s, there were attempts to build corporate databases, have one physical database, and all applications store their data in a single database. Typically expensive failures. Methodologies, waterfall, the big design up front. Um, 2000s, the whole approach to Agile, think small, became popular. Data warehousing, now I'm preaching to the converted here, so I'll be quick. Bill Inmon, an enterprise-wide data warehouse approach, think big. And then Ralph Kimball, let's go for small, do dimensional modeling, data marts. Last one I'll mention here is data fabric. That's centralized, so that's enterprise wide. And then roughly 2 decades later, data mesh, which is decentralized. So what on earth is happening here? It's the the issues is often if you try to think big, big design up front, etc., it costs a lot and delivers too little too late. But if you focus on just what we're going to deliver in the next agile sprint without any long-term vision, you can end up creating a nightmare of silos. So, is there a solution? And that's where, excuse me, please, we're going to jump into town planning and look at what we can learn, apply a metaphor, and see if we can do town planning for data. So, a little bit of history. Um, Australia before 1901 was a collection of separate states. 1901, we decided that we would become a nation, and some people joked and said we could have called ourselves the USA, the United States of Australia, but we gather that somebody else had grabbed that acronym already. There was a bit of a fight on. Our two biggest cities, Sydney and Melbourne, wanted bragging rights. They wanted to become the national capital. A compromise was reached. Some farmland roughly halfway between was chosen, so that we had a new city called Canberra. And here's the hypothetical. If you got the best tradespeople with the best tools and dropped them in the middle of a paddock and said, guys, I want you just to start building without town plan. What could possibly go wrong? So, what did actually happen? 1901 Federation, 1911 started building, 1913 started planning, 1918 completed planning. Better late than never. But the question is, can this happen in IT? Can you have good people with good tools who just start building? And unfortunately, I think the answer sometimes is yes. So let's have a look at styles of town planning. In Australia, we've got some remote places, and somebody finds some iron ore, some uranium, some diamonds, and the place where they want to start a mine doesn't even have a town letter, let alone a town hall with standards. So, a little bit of a cowboy type approach, the anarchy approach. The opposite in some of our big cities, you want to build something as simple as a granny flat out the back of your house for an elderly parent. Um, and I don't want to be harsh, but in some situations, your parent may die before you get permission to build. Um, that's not a good outcome. So, 1977, I believe it was, a gentleman called Christopher Alexander said there are patterns. There are patterns for windows, patterns for doors, patterns for kitchens, bathrooms, patterns for whole houses, patterns for hospitals, universities, patterns for whole cities. Um, and he said, let's leverage off these patterns. So, step number one for what I'll call smart town planning is you collect the patterns and get familiarity with them. And step two, you engage with the community. They don't have to be engineers or town planners. You can engage with the community, and the community might say, let's have one central university and maybe a hospital in the east and the west. Um, and let's have a housing estate here. And some bright spark might say, oh, and to save pumping costs, let's put the sewage treatment plant right in the middle of the housing estate. Not a good idea, probably. But the point is that you can arrange these patterns to suit your city. Once you've got the town plan and it's not down into great detail, you can pick one area to start with, build it, and iterate again and again. The same with IT is that there are patterns. We're going to get to them very shortly. You can arrange these patterns to suit your enterprise, and then you can build Agile if you want, but you can pick one area and build it, and what you build will be a coherent, consistent part of the whole. So a little bit more on Christopher Alexander. I've mentioned he had elementary patterns. For example, for windows, you can have casement windows, awning windows, and there's elementary patterns. There's assembly patterns and integration patterns for how these assembly units go together. And we've touched on it that you can get less technically competent people to join in the conversation. And importantly, because the patterns are solidly based, you can actually build against these patterns. That's patterns for cities, patterns for data. Some of you are probably already familiar with David Hay, a book, I think it was 1995, and then Len Silverstone, a three-volume series in the early 2000s with patterns. And again, we've got these three levels of patterns. You've got patterns that the data modelers might get excited about, self-referencing hierarchies, many-to-many resolution entities and the like. If we're going to build a bridge with the business, what we want to do though is talk about patterns for customers, products, events, tasks, geospatial locations, and how they work together. And it's the same message. The business people we interact with don't have to be technically competent. When you speak of location, you can say, just think of Google Maps. If you had a facility like that, what geospatial location information might be of interest to our enterprise? Um, Similarly with customers, they might not know, and some people actually hate the party role pattern. But you just say, think of your address book in your smartphone. What sort of entries would you want to capture for the enterprise? So you can have non-technical people join the conversation. And a side benefit is these patterns from these authors are directly implementable. So there's a little bit about, if you like, the town planning metaphor. So what might a town plan look like? Not like that. That's Canberra. What would a data town plan look like? I did some work for a water utility, and they had a high level, non technical, I will call it conceptual data model. where they said it's a water utility. They have assets that include water meters, and people, employees perform work to install and read the meters that are at a location, and customers pay for the use of the meter. So they were able to have a model on a page, which was, if you like, a data town plan. How useful is it? Well, it aids communication, but it's not detailed enough. We do need more. So, one of the things you might hear people talk of is we need taxonomies. And some people say, what on earth does a taxonomy look like in data? Let's start with taxonomy in the animal kingdom. Animals, they've got spines or they don't. The ones with spines include birds and mammals. And let's just say we want to extend this a little bit more. And we found a creature that has webbed feet, has a bill, lays eggs, swims. What is it? I'm talking to friends in the United Kingdom. It could be a duck. But Neil Strange is here in Australia right now, so maybe it's a platypus. Okay, that's just a light-hearted example of a taxonomy from the animal world. Now, let's have a look at it from a data perspective. I've got elements here in white that are from this much loved, much hated party role pattern, and I'm happy to talk with you about the strengths and weaknesses and why some people push back and others embrace it. But I did some work about 10 years ago for an organisation that looks after registration of Australia's doctors, nurses, chiropractors, etc. And the business weren't interested in this white stuff. What they wanted to do was say in their address book what sorts of people would have entries in the address book. And the answer was, well, we've got health practitioners, and I'm using a UML, Unified Modeling Language notation. If you're not familiar with it, don't worry. It's just saying that health practitioners break down into doctors, dentists, nursing practitioners, which break down further into nurses and midwives. But the address book will also have universities and training hospitals, people who lodge a complaint. Maybe they're concerned that their GP may be suffering from effects of alcohol or drugs, and they issue a complaint. There are employees in the organisation, and of course, there are patients. So that's a simplified example of a real world situation. It's a taxonomy. Instead of ducks and platypus, that is an enterprise centric thing. Is there more? It's like steak knives. So you've got the model on a page, you've got drilled down into types, and then underneath all of that, something that looks amazingly like a data model. You've got descriptions for the entities. I'm swinging back to the water utility example. What is a water meter? Well, it's an asset, and there's a description. Now, this, many people will say this, John, is a conceptual model, and conceptual models, according to some, shouldn't have attributes. Um, we can have a debate on that, but what I'm saying is for a data town plan, if the business decides there are certain attributes that will help them explain what a water meter is, let them define the attributes. And of course, define the interrelationships that water meters are sited at installation locations. So that's effectively saying we have a conceptual model. Now, again, I'm smiling. Some people in the IT world have debates about conceptual, logical, and physical models. I'm going to make it worse. Within conceptual, David Hayes says there are three levels. He has the overview model, the model on a page, like I showed you for the water utility. This is really important. Then there are semantic models, the semantics. What is the meaning of different views? So within the organization, within the water utility, you might have engineers, uh, customer account managers, um, HR people, etc., and they will have different views of the one organization. Talk to them, but you will find some clashes that you need to resolve. And that's where you end up with a single convergent model that represents the collective view of people across the enterprise. I mentioned Esperanto there. It's probably, I think, about 150 years ago in Poland, if I recall. There was a gentleman who saw some tension amongst four people groups within his village who spoke different languages. And his idea, his dream, was that if everybody in the world spoke their native tongue plus an artificial language he invented called Esperanto, then everybody in the world could communicate and hopefully there would be less tension. What does that mean in the enterprise view? We've got engineers, we've got accountants, we've got HR people, etc., etc. They want to be able to express their view of the corporate data in their own language, but allow a mapping to a common language. So, what are some examples? So, I've got some high level, if you like, patterns there, party role agreement. So, the example I'm taking is for buying and selling of land. So the parties and roles, the buyer, the seller, the banks, the solicitors who enter into agreements relating to houses and land at a location. And that's, if you like, the high level model on a page for conveyancing. Then I'm going to go to a different one in my home state if people want to look for gold, diamonds, controversial things like coal, oil, or gas, mineral sands, etc., you've got people that enter into agreements for exploration and extraction of resources at locations. The point here is that, for example, the address book holds different types of people. The agreements are quite different to the buying and selling of land with mortgages, transfers of land, um, guarantors, etc. But they are the same basic patterns that get tailored and specialized for your organization. So we're just going to have a little bit of fun here. Is if I said to you, there are components in a car, and one of the components is a differential, how many differentials in a car? And if we were doing this face to face, I'm sure we'd get people who'd say, how many diffs? The answer is in a traditional uh, rear wheel drive car, there's one diff at the back. For a part-time four-wheel drive, there's two. For a full-time four-wheel drive, there's three. The diffs are the same, and just like we looked at the use of generic patterns, but tailored for different organisations, similarly, we can have diffs in cars that perform quite different roles. So we move on now. That's town planning and patterns. Let's have a look at how town plans might be used for a lot more than data vault. So I'll start with a story. We in Australia uh, have some pretty bad wildfires. I think in Europe recently, Spain has been plagued with fires. 2009, there was more than 170 people died in one day because of fires. And there was an inquiry, what went wrong? It wasn't a witch hunt, it was to learn what we could learn about things that we could do better. One of the stories that came out of it was an incident controller turned to the representative of a volunteer organisation and he said, "How many fire trucks have you got here at this location right now?" And the response was, "We don't have fire trucks. We've got appliances. Is that what you mean?" Appliances was what they called the fire trucks. The frustrated incident controller turned to a representative of a government organisation and asked him, "Well, how many fire trucks or appliances do you have?" And the answer was neither. We've got tankers and slip-ons. Which do you mean? A slip-on, by the way, is where you slip on a tank and a pump on the back of a tray vehicle. The frustrated incident controller, and I heard it almost firsthand, and it had some expletives. He basically said, "I don't care what you call them. How many vehicles that can squirt water have you got?" I was engaged to come up with a common information model to facilitate computer to computer data sharing across multiple organisations and also person to person communication. We wanted an Esperanto for sharing data, but it did have a fun little side thing is people talk, and Dan Linstead, for example, talks of an enterprise ontology. But how big is the enterprise? In this particular case, the enterprise is virtual. It forms when you've got a wildfire, and up to 17 organisations participate. At the end of the fire, it's over. The enterprise is gone. So that's an example of the necessity of having a shared view. I was talking about better, easier data vault and more than data vault. If you have a data town plan, how can it be used? And here I've got a data warehouse design, but maybe you're developing in bespoke, tailored internal applications, and you can use the data town plan to help shape um, the systems you're developing. Maybe you're purchasing a packaged IT solution. You can benchmark against it. You might want to do master data management, reference data management, have a services or oriented architecture, data fabric, data mesh, interoperability, etc. There's a massive benefit though, is if all of these initiatives leverage off an Esperanto, a common data town plan, then you've got a far better chance of actually having data sharing between these various initiatives. So, some stories. I worked at one telecommunications organisation that had a whole team that had spent years developing their enterprise data model. One of the people left that organisation, went to another telco, and he said, "John, we've got three IT systems, three developments kicking off in 2 weeks' time. What I want you, John, to do is to develop an enterprise-wide, conceptual corporate data model. And instead of taking years with a team, you've got 2 weeks and you're on your own." I was able to do it. I leveraged Len Silverstone's patterns and we delivered. I mentioned the Australian registration of doctors and nurses. In 30th of June 2010, there were 83 organisations, state-based and profession-based, across Australia. 1st of July 2010, they became one. And if any of you have seen the pain of corporate acquisitions and mergers, you know that combining two companies can be tough. Combining 83 was harder. And they wanted a data town plan to drive a strategic integration of their data. Next story, I've spoken about building a bridge between um, the business and IT. I did some work for a not-for-profit, delightful people helping people in the community that have issues with domestic violence, unemployment, um, alcoholism, etc. And we worked together, had a lot of fun. But the thing that was interesting, I'm a data professional and I was asked to commit to a 3-year contract for 90 minutes, an hour and a half a month for the next 3 years to become an honorary board member. I actually sat on the board. I thought that's bridge building. Package evaluation we've spoken about. Did some work for a bank, and they wanted to replace their core system, and they wanted an independent benchmark. And again, we talk about IT or data professionals building bridges with management. The CEO, it's the CEO of a sizable Australian bank, and I needed time with him. And Miriam, his personal assistant, was very protective. You couldn't get near Anthony other than I found a way. I'd step past Miriam and say, Anthony, I think it's time we had a cup of coffee. You look like you need one, and it's my shout. So, for the cost of a cup of coffee, I got 5 to 10 minutes with the management. It was great. Uh, Another story on package evaluation, an organisation shipping um, parcels around Australia. They had a proposal from a vendor. They wanted their own internal benchmark. I developed it with the business. We lined it up against the package and saved that organisation $2 million in purchase, installation, training, etc., for a package that would never have worked. Um, Fun one here. We talk of processes and data. So there was a business process re-engineering exercise afoot, um, and they, surprise, surprise, hit a problem, and it was a data problem, not a process problem. They asked me to do an enterprise-wide data model in a day. Um, we did it. There's a few caveats. What was delivered was hand-drawn diagrams, came back for 3 weeks after to actually document it, but actually did an enterprise-wide data model, pattern-based, in a day. Lots of success stories. Doesn't always end that way, and I will not mention the organisation, but one organisation I was engaged to work with. They had a lot of internal politics, turf wars, personality issues, etc., and getting a an enterprise view was nigh impossible because the elements of the enterprise simply didn't want to work together. So, some closing comments. I'm going to talk of a T model. I'm not talking of the early Ford motor car. Um, the idea is mile wide, inch deep, and we looked at high level model on a page, identifying the subject areas, and then with an agreed framework, you can drill down on a project by project basis. Um, but you've got a town plan. It goes back to that story of Canberra. Would you really put tradespeople with tools in an empty paddock and start building the national capital? No, you have a town plan, and then every part of the whole is a consistent part of the whole. In Australia and possibly in the UK as well, is the concept of whole farm planning. And the example's simple. A farmer wants to do bits and pieces to improve his farm. He wants to put up new fencing, dig a new dam, build some new tracks. What you don't want is to build a big dam and then find that you want the track to go right through the middle of it. You have a plan, and then you deliver elements within that plan. So, in closing, um, if you want to, for free, look at TDAN, the Data Administration Newsletter, I think, network. I should know what TDAN stands for. Um, Go to tdan.com, search for top down, and you'll get three papers written by me on the top down town planning approach. Wasn't called town planning back then. If you want to chase up more on data model patterns, David Hay and Len Silverstone, highly recommended authors. Their collective works, though, add up to more than 2,000 pages. You've got to be really keen on data modeling to read all 2,000 pages. Um, if you have a look at either of these books in blue, but particularly the latest one, it's got lightweight patterns which may prove sufficient for data town planning. So the three books, you're doing agile programs, agile programming, Nimble Elephant, doing Data Vault, Elephant in the Fridge. If you want to do town planning for an easier Data Vault, but for a lot more than Data Vault, my latest book might be really good for you. Um, and then we go to a thing I touched on earlier. I spoke of Terry and Peter. Terry wanted to stay technical. Peter wanted to leave technology behind. What do you do? What I'm suggesting today is giving you perhaps an appetite for how you, from a technology perspective, might reach out, build a bridge to the business. But this is where I will respect you and your personal priorities. You might say, John, that's not for me. That's not what I want to do, not who I want to become. But thank you, John. I now know what to ask other people to do on my behalf. So, thank you, and I'll stop sharing. And just if you've got any other questions, we've got a bit more than 10 minutes, but I'm happy to stay on longer.
So Thomas has just said, what are the important requirements of such an enterprise data town plan so that it can be incrementally worked out further without impacting other parts of the town plan? So, for example, getting the relations between the concepts clear and stable seems more important than the concepts itself.
To give some context, imagine you're in a big organization. And you have such an information model, a high level one with all the concepts, but there are quite a lot of them. And of course, the concepts are also spread out over responsibility structures. Like each part of an organization is like responsible for a few concepts. And of course, they all tie together into one big organization view. But then I wonder, like, to really get it working in practice, how do you make sure that each part of the organization can focus on their concepts, but without impacting the other ones? Because as soon as you start clearing out, getting to like working out some concepts, it might also impact other things where you see that, yeah, actually the relation that we thought we had to this other you can use examples like documents and parties and party roles. Apparently, when there are one part might say like we have more documents than we thought initially. That means that we also have more roles to consider in our organization, and the roles are being managed or worked out by another part. So how do you go about like from drawing up the first version of the town plan, but then when somebody starts working it out further, how do you prevent a lot of impact to other parts of the
Right.
organization?
I'm sitting here, I'm smiling, I've got three answers. The first answer is clarify what the enterprise is because, and I'll take an example in Australia, telecommunication companies are by Act of Parliament, by law, are broken into wholesale and retail. And you can have one organisation but it's really two enterprises within the one organization. Or the not-for-profit I mentioned had what I will call a church aspect and a social care aspect. Are they two organizations or are they one? So, Thomas, the first thing is, how big is your enterprise? Um, yeah, the next one is the use of synonyms and taxonomies. So I spoke of the very real tension on fire trucks, appliances,
Yeah.
tankers, and slip-ons, and we got a really simple resolution. If you can imagine, fire truck as a super type, and then you had tanker and slip-on as subtypes, and
Hmm.
then you had a synonym for tanker, which was appliance, and every organization could look at their um, part of the model and say, you've respected me. I can see my part. So synonyms and taxonomies are very powerful in assembling a consolidated view that allows people to see their own part. And then the third one, I've got to remember, yes, you mentioned the roles that people play. I won't go into too much detail. Len Silverstone, one of the patterns, he talks about roles and he talks about declarative roles. So, taking the health practitioner example, I declare I am a dentist, a doctor. I am declaring, excuse me, I am a board member, etc. They need to be managed tightly. But then he has what he calls contextual roles. Somebody lodges a complaint. Their professional role in life, we hope, is not to complain. So you can then, if there are lots of roles, say which roles are incidental and which ones need to be managed formally. Does that help, Thomas?
Yes, those are some very good pointers. Thank you.
One more question here. Am I right to observe that your example suggests that data models were used for operational slash application databases? So follow up from that. Would the approach differ if you're building a data warehouse or data lake, but have little influence over the design of the source systems?
Okay, so I could flick back to an earlier slide where had the data town plan, and then I had individual applications, and then master data management, data warehousing, etc. So the approach to developing the data town plan is the same. Um, Independent of its intended use. And I'll take an example. I did some work for an organization who said, we need to make some strategic decisions, and part of it is getting agreement on what our fundamental business concepts are and how they interrelate. So we did a data town plan, and out of that, when the technology aspect perspective was added, they said, let's build a data warehouse. It happened to be a data vault, but the data town plan wasn't built to drive a data vault. It was built to have conversations with parts of the business, and then out of that came um, a foundation for a data vault design. So the long answer short is the data town plan is agnostic as to how it gets used.
It's a good answer. Thank you very much. I do actually have one question myself, which is you did mention generally this approach is for kind of all sizes of projects. Would you say the approach changes depending on, say, if it's a 6 week project versus a year long project? I suppose in some part with more agile projects, you don't always know how long the project is gonna be as well.
Right. I shared a story where I was given 1 day, 8 hours to come up with an enterprise-wide data model for a bank. And actually, the story's bigger than that. They wanted me to drill down into a thing called securitization. And I said, I can't even spell it, let alone know what it means. So, in that setting, I did data town plan, very elementary, in one day. And that was sufficient. But typically, Alex, 2, 3, 4 weeks is enough. In an agile world, um, if, for example, you've got 2 week sprints, you might say, I'll set aside 2 weeks to get a perspective, and I'll tell a story which might help, Alex, on sizing of projects. I spoke to an agile coach, and he said on one project he was involved in, the velocity, the delivery of points was getting slower and slower and slower. And what was happening was sprint one, they just created some tables and populated it and did testing, etc. Sprint two, new features required, but it required changes to the tables from sprint one. So they had to recode and retest the functionality for sprint one as well as doing sprint two. Sprint three, new tables, but changes to tables for sprints one and two, recoding, retesting. And the bottom line was, the guy said to the product owner, could I please have one sprint and get a data modeler in to have, I'll use the word a town plan, a high level framework of where we want to go. They measured the velocity before and after. The increase in velocity was 13, not 13% faster, 13 times faster, Alex. And that was from a 2 week sprint dedicated to data modeling. Bottom line is, I suggest that, from my experience, 2 days is the minimum to get a model on a page. 2, 3, 4 weeks will get you enough divergent modeling to look at pain points, different departments, different divisions, different business processes, and come up with your first consolidated model.
Yes, really insightful, actually. Thank you very much. It is one of those things where people often don't put don't put enough time into planning, and then they're directionless, right? So you need a direction. Okay, thank you very much. One last question's just come up. Oh, another one. Okay, I'll try and fill these coming through now. So, a question on timestamp. So, for example, given DST and challenges of complexity for multiple reasons, that some databases like certain, so storing with a time zone, for example. What's the best way to cope with complex model with columns and types to represent timestamps?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a little while since I was actually a hands-on developer, but particularly if you are an international organization or you're based in the UK and dealing with other parts of Europe, then have record the times as universal time, and then translate it and portray it in the way that is appropriate for the audience. So, yeah, don't go for UK time, or apart from if you live in Greenwich. um, yeah, but yeah, go for universal time. I'm not sure if that's answering the question, but that's what I've seen done. And people say, "Oh, look, we don't need to do it." But I'll give a real example of an Australian situation, and it involved police forces. And if you had a crime committed and then somebody flees across the border, and they say, "Well, hang on, the actual crime was committed 20 minutes before we arrested the person. How can that be?" You need universal time.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a developer's nightmare, time zones. So have some kind of central time and build off that if you need to.
Yep.
I would,
So
yeah,
without going into great detail too, and it comes up in Data Vault, you've got a whole heap of times. You've got the time stamps in the database, and you've got the effective time where something was seen by the business as happening. Um,
yeah,
and you've got yeah, bitemporal concepts, etc. I can chat about that at length if you like, but just a caution that yeah, timestamps in databases record a fact, but you also need to capture, if you can, when the business sees an event effectively occurring.
yeah. That's exactly that. If you have multiple states of operation, in different parts of the country, for example, then sometimes they're going to care about exactly when it happened in that time zone. So it
Yep.
depends. Yeah. Okay. So one last question is how would you approach data town plan capture in a company that may not believe in the value of such a plan? Uh, for example, company I work for has just stopped an initiative of building foundational data products that deliver very little value.
Yep. I have a whole section in the Data Elephant in the Boardroom on these sorts of topics. And the bottom line is, and I touched on it briefly, you do get organisations that resist and say, we don't want to do this. Um, the organisation, as I say, I'm not going to say too much because I don't want to even hint at identifying them, but they had various parts of the organization that were responsible for their own costs and profit, and they ran autonomously. And the players said, we aren't part of the same organisation. I am a director in this unit and I'm responsible and I don't play with the other parties. And yet they were part of an international organisation. And at the international level, they wanted a data town plan. At the end of the day, the local voices completely squashed it, didn't happen. So, Alex, um, I could tell many stories, but typically, people, if they can see the value of Data Town Plan by hearing examples of where people trip up because there's no clear definition of what a customer is, there's no clear definition of what an asset is, etc., etc. I'll, I'll tell a quick story. An organisation that the CEO said, "How many employees have we got?" And IT said, "Well, what do you mean by employees? Do you mean those on payroll? Do you include contractors? What about the person who mows the front lawn once a fortnight?" And the CEO got quite angry, saying, "You know what an employee is, don't waste my time." But they didn't know what he meant by employee.
Yeah, it's this is why modeling and language and talking at the business level is very important. And asking the right questions, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say that there's been, over the years, pushback, and understandably, about corporate data models that, as I say, take too long and cost too much, are too detailed, and are out of date. A town plan for a city is high level. It doesn't get down to the colour of the tiles in the town hall kitchen, and it shouldn't. It's just an outline, a framework, and if you encourage people to avoid getting into too much detail, people can see the value. Look, I'm going to tell another quick story. I did a data town plan for an organisation, happened to be in the kitchen the following week, and the CEO is bragging to others about the data town plan he developed last week. That was ownership.
Well, if he's bragging about it, then he's clearly happy with it. But it'd be great to give you credit.
Oh, part of a team is my answer.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, I think that's all the questions. There was one last comment from Andreas, which this ties into the ubiquitous language concept from DDD. So it's something we can relate to.
Oh, look, if I can, I'll comment on that quickly. Um,
Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah. So with data mesh, if you want a ubiquitous, and I have trouble pronouncing that word, language for a domain, but if there are other data mesh projects within the same organization, it might be helpful that each of those individual initiatives could leverage off a data town plan to have less gap.
Very good point. Yeah. Okay. Okay. There's one. Okay. I will make this the last question, so they keep coming in. Have you had any experience of using conceptual data models to identify critical data elements, CDEs, for data governance? Any resources that you would suggest?
No, data governance is just an area I haven't got expertise in, is the simple answer.
Fair enough. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much, John. As always, it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for your time. And hopefully you can get some rest now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex, and thank you everybody who's joined in. I do appreciate it. Okay,
Thank
bye.
you. Have a good one, everyone. Bye bye.